Good afternoon and welcome to episode 2 of Unconventional, a limited virtual series focused on criminal justice reform and the role that it's playing in the 2020 election cycle. My name is Holly Harris and I'm the President and Executive Director of the Justice Action Network. And together with our co-sponsoring organizations, the Alliance for Safety and Justice and Americans for Prosperity, we're excited to present this special RNC edition of our series focused on Battleground, Ohio, and featuring Alice Marie Johnson, who served 21 years of a life sentence for a low-level, nonviolent drug crime before she was granted clemency by President Trump. Alice will take the stage during primetime programming at the RNC on Thursday. But first, she's here with us, and she'll be sitting down with former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer for a virtual fireside chat to talk about what her appearance at the RNC means for second chances. Now, it's my privilege to introduce our friend and a pioneer in the criminal justice reform movement, Mark Holden. He's a board member at Americans for Prosperity and Senior Vice President of Stand Together. Mark is perhaps the most knowledgeable, influential, and authentic voice in the conservative justice reform movement, having started his career as a prison guard. Not everybody knows that. And then rising through the ranks at Koch Industries to become the face of their criminal justice reform work. Mark was a driving force behind the First Step Act, the groundbreaking bipartisan prison and sentencing reform bill that was signed into law by President Trump at the end of 2018. And you can always pick Mark out of the photo in the Oval Office where they're signing the legislation because he's about a foot taller than everybody else in the room. Mark harnessed the momentum from that federal victory and applied it to the states. And he's been very engaged in the criminal justice reform effort in Ohio, even flying into Columbus to testify at a committee hearing. Today, he'll be talking to key Ohio lawmakers who are at the table working to pass two of the most significant criminal justice reform bills in the country, just as both presidential campaigns are descending on the battleground state to win its crucial electoral votes. Mark, I'll stop embarrassing you and I'll turn the program over to you and our friends in Ohio.
Well, thank you, Holly. That was a great introduction. I appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here. I wish I could be there live, but that isn't happening. So it's good we have this technology. I'm really excited to be with Representative Lang and Senator Eklund to talk about these issues. I'd just like to say a couple of things at the start about criminal justice reform in general. And I'd really like to applaud the folks here today in Ohio who are trying to get this done during, the worst pandemic in anyone's lifetime, trying to get this done there, trying to get it done in another election year, which looks like it's going to be a, cut and dry, whatever. It's going to be up and down in a very tough situation, the national election, trying to get something done like this that, a lot of states have tried to do it. Some have done it, but doing it now shows such courage and leadership. And I want to thank them for that. I think it's really important legislation though, obviously, because what it's going to do is make Ohio's criminal justice system and their society just more just, more safe, more redemptive. It's going to make sure that we're prioritizing human potential and at the same time reducing fiscal waste and resources on people who don't need to be in prison. And what we've seen over the last several years, including what Holly mentioned, the First Step Act, which many of us, including Holly, were a part of. It was a lot of people and it was a great fight and we won. But what happened in the First Step Act was a lot of sentencing reform and also all about rehabilitation. And so this is great that Ohio, one of the most important states in our country from a political and obviously just from everything else from our economy, that they're going to hopefully pass a bill that will make their system safer and keep people out of the system who have mental health issues or why they're in the system or who have a substance abuse disorder. And one of my favorite quotes is that, and I've used this several times when we've gotten second chance acts done and sentence reform done in different states. It goes, man should never place a period where God intended a comma. And that's what I think we're really talking about here is redemption, because we do know in our system how important it is to have public safety, and it's important to rehabilitate people, but it's also important to keep people out who haven't done anything wrong other than the fact that they're sick or have a substance abuse issue. So with all that, I want to start the questions of our panelists here, the two of them. I'm going to start um, with Senator Eklund, and I'd like to ask him about about the bill, the Senate bill, which I testified in front of his committee, and hopefully this will get done maybe this year or next year. But my question is, under your bill, it classifies minor drug possession as an unclassified misdemeanor and it passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, despite some detractors claiming without the threat of a felony, they cannot compel a change in behavior from those who are struggling with addiction. Why are you so confident that that isn't the case? Why do you believe in this bill?
Mark, thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this today. And why do I believe that opposition is unfounded? Okay, it's principally and largely based upon the conversations that I've had with people who have wrestled with chemical dependence and are among those who ultimately successfully unshackle themselves. And to a person, when I've spoken to them, I've asked them, was the threat of a felony charge or a felony conviction or a felony plea something that compelled you finally to seek and get the help you need and to overcome what you were facing? And the answer uniformly has been no. It was something else in their lives, some realization that came to them when they had an opportunity to act upon it that made all the difference. Now, that, of course, does not surprise me in the least. It's completely intuitive to me, because when I think about it just broadly, I think people who use drugs and wind up running afoul of the law oftentimes they've lost their families, ruined their personal relationships, lost their jobs, can't get a job, been thrown out of their houses, been divorced, and any number of parade of horribles. And every time they use many of these drugs that are abused, they face the prospect that at any point in time they could die just by using these drugs, given the atmosphere in which we live today, with so many drugs being laced with fentanyl and very powerful stuff. So I think it's pretty plain, without even the anecdotal evidence, that the threat of dire consequences, such as a felony conviction, isn't going to deter people from anything. And more importantly, I think while I think that the label of a felony has very little to do with what people do or don't do on the front end of their affliction, it has a big part in what happens if and when they're able to rectify their situation and find some kind of redemption. Because a felony record in this day and age is an impediment to so many things. And look, there are some felonies for which it should be an impediment to a lot of things. But for something like this, which is simply somebody succumbs to the allure of drugs and becomes dependent, I don't think that should be a determinant of what happens to such a person over the rest of the course of their lives. It's really pretty, it's anecdotal, hard on the ground testimonials, if you will, that I've heard, but it's also intuitive to me, given the circumstances.
Thank you. Chairman Lang, I'd like to get you involved here. What brings you to this issue? What motivates you to try to get this bill done? Why are you so such a proponent of it?
Yeah, I'm a strong proponent of this bill, and I'm confident we're going to get it out of the House this GA, so before the end of the year, and get it back over to our friends in the Senate to concur on some a few modifications that we've been working with Chairman Eklund on. But the reason I'm so excited is it's a couple of reasons. One, I believe for the most part, jail should be reserved for the violent offenders. We have to stop locking up people that we're really, really mad at, and only lock up those people that really scare us, for the most part, and there's always exceptions. But my primary goal for being in the State House, and everybody has their one pet project they're working on, my primary goal is to make Ohio the most business-friendly state in the nation. So I am all about economic development, and this bill ties perfectly into economic development, and it does it in two ways. Under my Business First platform, there's 4 things that we are working on. 1 is tax reform and simplification. 2 is regulatory reforms. 3 is reducing the cost and complexity of government. And 4, at least before the COVID, was workforce development. This ties in perfectly with item 3 and 4, reducing the cost and complexity of government. Let me explain how that happens. If you go back 50 years ago, the cost of state government was about 5% of Ohio GDP. I define GDP as our funding source. Senator Eklund will tell you that's not quite accurate, but it's about 97, 98% accurate. Fast forward to today, the cost of state government is 14% of GDP. So in the last 50 years, state government has grown at 5,330%, while our funding source, our business community, has grown at 1,800%. We're outgrowing our funding source, and this is unsustainable. How does this bill and other reforms help? By reducing the cost and complexity of government. The director of our corrections recently told me that it costs about $42,000 a year to incarcerate a citizen or someone in the state of Ohio. We currently have 50,000 people incarcerated. We are I believe number 14 in population, but we're number 4 in America in terms of percent of population incarcerated. And by the way, America is 4% of the total population of the world, yet we're 25% of those incarcerated. So if you just take that number, 42,000, which I don't think is accurate, I think the real number is closer to 80. Because if you've got someone that is locked up, the odds that their family is on welfare, the odds that they are getting all this other benefits from the government increases significantly. I think the real cost of incarceration is closer to 100,000 a year, but let's just say it's 80,000 a year. We have 50,000. Let's just pretend 10,000 of those are low-level, non-violent offenders. If we take the conservative number of 80,000, if we can get 10,000 people out of jail, we've just saved $800 million a year. And more important, because of the workforce development issue we have, if we can get them ready to go into the workforce, let's say that's another $2,000 a year they're paying in taxes. That's about $1 billion a year impact we can have on our budget. What if I'm wrong? What if it's not 10,000? What if there's 20,000 non-violent, low-level offenders that we can set free on our businesses that sorely needed the help? You know, that's a $2 billion impact we can have, not to mention the intellectual capital, the human minds, the labor that we are today is locked up, that tomorrow we can set loose on the capitalistic society that needs that help.
What are you you believe that you'll be able to get it done this year, like you said? I mean, I'm not doubting you, but it's an election year. There's a lot of other things going on with the pandemic and everything else. How realistic is it that you'll be able to get it back to the Senate and they'll be able to move forward with it? Is there a lot of opposition?
Yeah, there is some opposition, but we recently had a conference call with some leaders on the Criminal Justice Committee in the House, Senator Eklund and Senator O'Brien. And there's a few things we still have to work on. I'm confident we can get those handled. And the other thing I feel really good about is our new Speaker of the House, who was just appointed a few weeks ago, is from the Criminal Justice Committee. So he's intimately familiar with this bill. And he is on board with getting this bill done. And one of the really great things about this bill, and I have to give Eklund and O'Brien tremendous amounts of credit. They've created the perfect storm. It's one of the few things going on in Columbus that the Democrats and the Republicans are fully embracing. Now, our motivations are different. The Democrats are there because they really want to help those people that have been, unfairly penalized. And don't get me wrong, I want to help those too, but there's also the top 3% of society that needs the workforce, that needs us to reduce the cost and complexity of Ohio so those companies can come back here and bring the jobs. So we've got the perfect storm, a bill that both Democrats and Republicans, for the most part, are supporting. I'm guessing the support is in the 90% range. I believe it passed unanimously out of the Senate, if I remember correctly, Senator Eklund. But, it's the perfect storm. It's the right bill. The time is right. The Speaker is going to be receptive to it. And yes, Mark, I'm confident we'll get it done this GA.
Now that's great to hear. And one of the things that I've learned over the years on working on criminal justice issues, like you were saying, sir, that it's something that brings everybody together for one reason or another, left, right, center, whatever it is. And I like to say that the coalitions that we've been able to build over the last 10 to 15, 20 years with some of the people who are here today and others, it's a coalition that goes from Snoop Dogg to Donald Trump, because those are the issues they agree on when they talk about sentencing reform and things like that. And so I don't think you're going to find any other issue like that. I'd be amazed if we did. It'd be great, but I'm very, very skeptical we ever will. Senator, I wanted to get back to you. I know Ohio's done a lot with drug courts, which are great, the specialty courts. How will the bill impact them? Will it impact it at all? Will that be something that will be incorporated into the bill? Just wondering what the thoughts are there.
Well, the thoughts, Mark, have been that we have strained to shape the bill in such a way that it has no impairment of the good work that specialty courts, broadly writ, are doing in the state of Ohio. And it's not just the drug courts, it's the veterans courts, it's the mental health courts. There are many, many different permutations on that theme, and they're all terrific. And the object has been from the beginning that for these low-level possession offenses, that if locally, the local prosecutors and the courts believe that these cases now to be reclassified as unclassified misdemeanors are best handled, and the procedures we have in the bill are in place, are best implemented through a local drug court, by all means, go and do it, because they do a wonderful job. But we have to be mindful of the fact that not every jurisdiction has a functioning, established drug court. Maybe some of them will adopt that metric and that mechanism in the face of Senate Bill 3, which would be a darn good thing. And so we're trying very hard not to impede or impair in any way the good work of the folks who are running these drug courts throughout the state of Ohio, because I think the kind of offenses that we're talking about here, low-level possession offenses, look, oftentimes they're going to be first or second time offenders with a low-level possession offense. Well, what better time to intervene with something like a drug court, before somebody has gotten to the point where they're really beyond the pale and at greater risk. So I think the two systems, that is to say the specialty court systems and Senate Bill 3 and its mechanisms are A, designed to, and B, will work hand in glove to continue the good work that's going on in the drug courts. No question.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Another question for you. Ohio voters rejected a similar ballot initiative by wide margins a while ago. What makes you think that this bill, was it the fact that it was not a bill that was being done that led people to vote against the initiative that was put out there? It failed, as I understand it.
Well, sure it did. It failed big time. And look, there were, 7.5 million people had the opportunity to vote on that. I can't speak for all of them, but I know that a lot of them looked at it and said, this is no place, this is no issue to be dealing with in a constitutional amendment. Once something becomes ensconced in the Constitution of any state, changing it is like pulling teeth. And when you're in a field like drug addiction, drug abuse, chemical dependency, call it what you want, and the criminal justice system, we need to be a heck of a lot more flexible and a heck of a lot more spry in terms of adjusting to developments as they happen. And that's why it's better to do this through legislation than through a constitutional amendment, number one. Number two, the constitutional amendment proposal contains some very, very, what I'll call over-the-top provisions. And look, people were swinging for the fences back then, and that's what they do. But there were retroactivity provisions in that constitutional amendment proposal that would have released from prison people who were serving time for crimes that were not just low-level drug offenses, but pretty serious offenses. And I'm sure there was a great backlash about that aspect of the constitutional amendment proposal. So this is kind of a much more focused approach, and it's a much more responsible way of going about this than simply rewriting our Constitution in a way that would render us incapable of adjusting to new developments as they occur, Mark. So there's a big difference.
Yeah, it makes sense. Representative Lang, want to go back to you. And have you had any discussions with the governor? If you can't, talk about that, that's fine. But do you think that he'll be open to signing this law if it gets put on his desk?
Most of my conversations with the governor lately have revolved around COVID-19 and my disagreement to his response and his actions that he's doing. So no, I have not spoken specifically to the governor or his chief of staff about this piece of legislation. But I tend to think that he would be very open to signing this. As I mentioned, it's the perfect storm. It's one of the few things that the majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats are both supporting. We don't get a lot of legislation like that.
Yeah,
Mark, I might add, if I may, that we've had an ongoing dialogue and engagement with the administration on Senate Bill 3 from very, very early on. And they've been very judicious, I'll say that, and cautious. They've not come out and said, oh, this is the greatest thing since pockets or anything like that. But nor have they said, hold the phone, we don't want any part of this. And they've been very engaged in the process as it has evolved. And so I have great hope that they will find it to be to their liking once the good legislators in the House have their opportunity to deal with it.
Well, I know when I've met with you and others and the governor about Safe Streets Second Chances, he was very open to that. And that was a couple of years ago when we were out there. And hopefully this is the same type of legislation that would help people who need help. And it seems like that would be right in the governor's wheelhouse, hopefully. Okay, getting kind of short on time here. I want to ask you both, hopefully we're going to get this done, the sentencing reform, and this is going to get through. What's next on criminal justice reform in Ohio?
Well, if I may, there are a number of very purposeful things right on our plate right now that I believe are ripe for the taking. House Bill 1 it builds upon what we did with Senate Bill 66 in the last General Assembly in terms of intervention in lieu of conviction and record sealing, liberalizing, pardon the expression, the mechanisms for getting records sealed. Paramount, and I'm hopeful that we have a path forward in the Senate on that. House Bill 136 is a bill that would prohibit the imposition of the death penalty on those who can prove that they suffered from a serious mental illness at the time they committed the crime, and that it impaired their ability to conform their behavior to the law. That passed out of the House. It passed out of the Senate Criminal Justice Committee when I was chairman 2 General Assemblies ago, and I have great hope for that one. We also have, and this is just the short list, Mark, so forgive me for taking so much time, but we have, believe it's Senate Bill 256, I want to say, which would prohibit the imposition of a life without the opportunity for parole sentence upon a juvenile who committed a crime when they were 18 years of age or younger, and under certain circumstances. There's a lot more to it, but those are 3 very, very important bills so far as I'm concerned. So I think that we're moving in the right direction. I think that the issues that the chairman mentioned in terms of what coalesces support around these issues are equally applicable to those issues as well. And obviously, a couple of them have come to us from the House, and I'm hopeful that we can see our way clear to move those in the Senate as well. And we've got one in the Senate that we hope to get over there. And since a similar bill passed out of the House, boy, I think that was in the 2 General Assemblies ago, would find favor over there as well. They've been through the mill a number of times, and I'm very upbeat and optimistic about these prospects. I really am.
And I'll just add to that, Mark, in addition to what Senator Eklund said, I hope this bill is a catalyst to, in the next GA, let's look at everything that has been low-level nonviolent. So, you know, we're working mostly now on people that are consuming drugs and trying to help them get a better life. But we have a lot of nonviolent white-collar criminals. You know, maybe we can figure out how to punish them financially rather than locking them up and allowing them to be somewhat productive in the capitalism system. But, you know, we can look at everything that is a nonviolent offense and see, hey, is there a better way or a different way to inflict punishment rather than incarceration?
No, that makes sense. I think you all have gone through your criminal code before and tried to get rid of some of the outdated laws. And one thing I'd encourage is to make sure that if you have conspiracies, drug conspiracies in particular, that you actually go on what the person did and not on some fact that just because you were in a meeting, you become the kingpin, which is what happened to my good friend who's going to be speaking here soon, Miss Alice Marie Johnson. That we need to get really, in my opinion, much better on the war on drugs and focus on who are the people who are hurting people, and then others who have other issues. So hopefully that'll happen as well. Last thing I do want to say, I want to thank you both for your leadership in these really tough times. It means a lot to all of us and to your constituents and to the country in setting this, as the way to go forward. One last thing, and they're going to talk about this soon, but if you look at the Republican and the Democrat presidential candidates, they're both very much focused on criminal justice reform. So this, despite all the language that goes out there, this is still a big issue. It's an issue that both parties want to lead on, and I think that's great. And we encourage you to keep doing that, because it really, at the end of the day, the statistics you started with about the number of people who are in our prison systems and compared to other countries, it's just shocking. So anyway, I don't know if you all have any last thoughts. Please go ahead.
I'll have one last comment, and I'm so glad that both the Democrats and the Republicans at their national level are focused on this. I shared this statistic earlier. America, 4% of the world's population, 25% of the world's incarcerated. We lead the world in percentage of population that's incarcerated. Do you really think Americans are any worse than Europeans or Africans or Russians or Chinese? I don't. I think we're better.
Mark, I would add as a closing note, my thanks to you and to your colleagues and to the sponsors of this event, all of whom have shown great advocacy skills and great hearts, if I may, in advocating on behalf of criminal justice reform generally, and their support and your support and those who are members of these organizations gives us great courage to go forward, and helps stiffen the spine, which is at times not a bad asset to have, right? And so thank you all so very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark, and Chairman Lang, Chairman Eklund. Ohio is really lucky to have the both of you, and it's great to hear that bicameral, bipartisan cooperation is still alive and well in Ohio. And I just wanted to note, Mark, you had raised whether Governor DeWine would be supportive of this legislation. And I do recall through the magic of Twitter that Governor DeWine recently affirmed the need for sentencing reform in Ohio. So I'm going to take that as a yes. So thank you all again so much. It's great to see that the Buckeye State continues to lead the nation in criminal justice reform. Thank you again, Mark, old friend. Old as in dear, not old as in chronologically old. Also working toward the goal of ensuring Ohio continues to be a leader in the criminal justice reform movement. We have my colleagues, Shakira Diaz from the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and Micah Derry from Americans for Prosperity. Hey, it's great to see both of y'all on the ground there in Ohio. Shakira probably dying of heat outside, and Micah looking like he's getting ready to sing us a song in his studio. Listen, it'd be great if y'all could share with our audience and with reporters, some insights on the criminal justice reform effort in Ohio. What the prospects are for passage of significant comprehensive legislation, and how Ohio voters feel about these issues. Shakira, Micah, I'll turn it over to you all.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks, Holly, for this amazing event. Thank you for the continued partnership. As you know, USGAN, AFP, and ASJ, along with many other organizations in the state of Ohio, have been working for 18 months through 14 hearings, specifically on SB3, but we've done a lot of work and in a lot of different respects as it relates to criminal justice reform. And one thing that I just want to reiterate from the previous session as it relates to what the legislators elevated, criminal justice reform is not a partisan issue. It is something that everyone is touched by, everyone supports, which is why we've collaborated so closely. This has been an issue that, Ohioans from every walk of life, from every corner of the state are behind, whether you are a police chief, a crime survivor, judges, prosecutors, we have, the ACLU, we have the Public Defender's Office, a number of different organizations. It really speaks to, it's not surprising that in the poll that your organization did, that these numbers are just absolutely amazing. If my daughter came home with these grades, these percentages every semester, I would be very happy mom. Mike, I want to kick it over to you.
for those of us that work in the grassroots realm and with Americans for Prosperity Ohio, the work that we do really relies on will people see enough of, one, a need, and two, an opportunity to make a difference. And so as we can see in these poll numbers, the level of awareness for Ohioans of not just the need, but also about what our system should be. 88% of Ohioans strongly agreeing that the main goal of Ohio's criminal justice system should be rehabilitating people to become productive, law-abiding citizens. One of the ones that actually really stood out to me from the poll that was run by Justice Action Network was that 87% of Ohioans strongly favor reducing costly prison time for low-level, nonviolent offenders, just like what Chairman Lang spoke about, in Ohio's prisons, and reinvesting some of those savings to create a stronger, more cost-effective, community-based supervision programs that hold offenders accountable for their crimes. For many that are just coming into the criminal justice space for the first time ever, they see some of the policy items, and their biggest question is, but then what? And in Ohio, one of the most hard-hit states in the nation when it comes to the opiate epidemic, second only behind West Virginia in deaths per capita, there's that real concern. So what do we do if we change our current approach? Most will agree that the status quo isn't working, but where do we go from here? And I think that as we have been able to work together in a bipartisan fashion in dealing with the sentencing aspect, it's really opened the doors for further work in that broad consensus space of what we do next and where we go from here. Because I know for our activists, ranging from folks that would describe themselves as Tea Partiers to people that are self-proclaimed Democrats, we have a wide spectrum of people that are coming and working together with us in order to have that impact now and get on the ground level for what will be an ongoing reform effort.
That's right. That's right. I mean, one of the things that's become very clear, which has really coalesced all the support about the much needed reform that Ohio is ready for, is that responding to addiction with felony convictions does nothing to reduce overdoses. Micah, you indicated the high rate of overdoses where Ohio is. We need a change, right? What saddling people with a felony conviction is effective at doing is increasing government waste. We don't need that. We need to redirect those dollars to help people get access to treatment, right? To more low cost, effective ways of getting folks on track. We also know that felony convictions undermine recovery because, as both Senator Eklund and Representative Lang indicated, there are a number of different barriers that are put in someone's path, which make it extremely difficult for someone to stay successful in their recovery journey. So we want to make sure that people are supported in their recovery, not undermined. Last, I'll add that community-based treatment programs have been studied for decades. They have been found to be much more effective than imprisonment and felony convictions at reducing recidivism rates, at reducing costs, and helping people stay on track. So, it's one of the many reasons we've worked together. It's common sense. I want to add in, House Bill 1, which is also an element here. We want to make sure that both SB 3 and House Bill 1 pass out of this General Assembly this year. Ohio cannot wait any longer. And it's very clear that there is broad-based support for both of these bills, but we need a pathway that's going to really get us on track to our next step, right? There are a number of different reforms that have to follow these, but we need these to get to the next view.
And Carrie, you just said it, and this Ohio can't wait any longer. We heard it referred to numerous times during the first panel that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And for even as diverse as Ohio is and how it has been impacted, we have certain hot spots in Ohio where the infection is much more widely spread, and others where it's barely been felt, but the economic impact has still been there all the same as we've been trying to contain and flatten the curve. The fact is that drug use is up. Overdoses are up. People who are dealing with suicidal thoughts is all up. We're going to be feeling the impact of COVID-19 long after there's a vaccine. based off of things that just happened since March of this year. We have to get our justice system to a place that it is able to handle the fallout of a pandemic. And today we are not there. We've already seen what happens when we overcrowd our prisons. We're already at 140% capacity. We saw how rapidly COVID-19 spread with deadly effect in particular prisons right here in Ohio. One of our more rural counties north of Columbus really saw this impact immediately as the shutdowns began. We cannot afford to have a second wave of that kind of growth in our prison population when we don't even know what the end of the pandemic even looks like. We have to fix this now. I'm so glad that we've got leaders like Chairman Lang and Chairman Eklund who are wanting to make sure that this is done. And for Chairman Eklund, as he terms out of his seat and leaves the General Assembly at the end of this year, I get the sense from him listening to him today that he knows that the clock is short and wants to ensure that this is done because he knows what's at stake. And I think that Ohioans are beginning to understand that urgency as well.
You know, Micah, that sense of urgency, you know, we've talked about it throughout, but I think it's also important to highlight a couple of things that are really important and have been compounded, right? So one is that the fiscal impact projections of the passage of SB 3, we're looking at a potential cost savings of $75 million. We spend nearly $2 billion in our state prison system. Mind you, this is including people who really are not being served well, do not need to be in prison, do not need the felony conviction. But once they get the felony conviction, they have 1,000,001 barriers to accessing employment, meaning that they are unable to contribute to the tax base. Add to that all the deficiencies that our state is dealing with, given the reduced tax income in our state. We're expecting to see at least 20% cuts across the board in every department. So the timing is right for a number of different reasons.
I think that Chairman Lang touched on this. Shakira, you just mentioned it as well. In this whole idea of that restoration, and
right.
It doesn't matter what your motivation is in this particular case. It's comes down to the core component of recognizing potential. And when we're talking about people that are currently losing their potential based off of a faulty justice system in the first place and a dogma that is rooted back in the 80s and 90s that has torn away so much human potential in our country. And I keep thinking and hearing in the back of my head what Chairman Lang left us with. We incarcerate at such a higher level than all these other countries, other superpowers in the world. And is it because they're better than us? I don't think it is. And being able to unleash that human potential, whether your motivation coming to the table is economic or if it is from the raw humanitarian aspect, the fact is we have to do it. It has to be done. In Ohio, we have over 800 collateral sanctions on people with drug-related felonies alone. You know, I had a great conversation with a senator from Southwest Ohio when we were awaiting the vote in the Senate, and he shared then that as a man who'd had a career in banking, multiple times he had wanted to hire someone, give them a job, a good paying white collar job, could not hire them because of drug possession felonies and well in their background had nothing to do with banking. We got to unleash the human potential.
Right, that's right. You know, one last thing, you know, we've mentioned all the folks who are a part of this, but I want to elevate two constituencies which are important. Parents who've lost their children to overdoses. There's two fathers that our organization, ASJ, works really closely with. And both of these dads attest to the fact that their sons could have overcome their addiction. Actually, one of them was able to, but what they could not overcome was the stigma of a felony conviction, which led to many closed doors, endless humiliation, right? Just robbing these young men of their dignity and their ability to work. They're both fully behind this, and they do this work as hard as it is in honor of their sons. The other constituency are victims of crime. You know, you wouldn't expect largely, you know, that constituency would support something like this. But we also know that unaddressed trauma, not supporting people when they've experienced violence, can lead somebody to drugs. One of the barriers, one of the many barriers to a felony conviction in Ohio is the inability of accessing support if you have a minor drug possession conviction and you're a victim of a crime. So I just want to elevate this and just bring it back home to like the real people representing the entire state of Ohio who need this to pass. And I'm just so honored to just work with the both of you, along with the many organizations in the state who are working really hard to pass this bill, as well as the parents who are fully supportive.
Shakira and Micah, thank you all so much for all the work that you're doing in Battleground, Ohio. And I also wanted to note that the poll that you were referencing, which was conducted by Robert Blizzard at Public Opinion Strategies, who's done hundreds of surveys in Ohio for conservative candidates, it showed really strong support among women.
Right.
And women, that's the constituency that's turning elections right now. So if you want a narrative with women going into November, supporting criminal justice reform is a great place to start. So again, thank you all so much. We appreciate everything you're doing. As goes Ohio, so goes the country. Hopefully that saying is true, because certainly what's happening in the Buckeye State, is going to have a ripple effect all across the states and at the national level. So thank you all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all. And speaking of the national level, that's a great segue to our Fireside Chat, which will be hosted by our friend and one of the best known and well-respected White House press secretaries in my lifetime, Ari Fleischer. Hopefully we've got Ari. Ari, of course, had the incredible responsibility of standing behind the podium during 9/11 and keeping the American people informed during that indelible moment in our nation's history. And I'll just real quickly, Ari, say that I was out at the ball field the other day telling a bunch of the parents, the kids that play with my son, about this event, and they were so excited. And they said, yeah, we know Ari. We follow his tweets every year on 9/11. So they know you well and really respect you, the Republicans and the Democrats, and that's what it's all about. So Ari now runs his own shop, Ari Fleischer Communications. And I'd say he's enjoying being an expert observer of American politics rather than an active participant in it. Ari, correct me if I'm wrong.
You got that right.
We're thrilled that Ari could join us today to interview our friend and national criminal justice reform advocate, Alice Marie Johnson, who has a very exciting opportunity coming up this week. So one note for reporters, if you all have questions for Alice, Ari, of course, is an expert at fielding questions from reporters, but please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. And hopefully, time permitting, Ari can take some of these questions and pose them to Alice. So Ari, take it away.
All right. Well, Holly, thanks for the intro. Alice, I'm just thrilled to be here with you. I mean,
Ari,
it's wonderful to see you. I love reading your story, and thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me. Ari, I remember the last time we were together, we were on a panel together being interviewed. So glad to be back with you today.
You got it. Well, my name is Ari Fleischer, and it's my honor to introduce Alice Marie Johnson. Not that she needs any introduction to anybody anymore, but she in many ways is considered to be the godmother of criminal justice reform. She was granted clemency by President Trump, of course, after serving 21 years in prison for a low-level, non-violent offense. I just find it unbelievable that our society can do that to anybody. And so somebody I'm talking to endured that. Alice is in high demand. You may have seen her featured in President Trump's very first campaign commercial, which was a Super Bowl commercial. She's also launched her own foundation, which is something I want to talk to you about today, Alice. And Thursday night during the Republican convention, she has a prime time speaking slot, which is a big deal. So Alice, congratulations on everything you've done. Congratulations on the life that you've lived and the life that you now are free to live anew. How are
Thank
you
you.
feeling just about this groundbreaking moment? What a week it's got to be for you.
It has been a hectic week for me. I've been doing, oh my goodness, family, friends have been reaching out. Friends who may have not the political views that are being expressed at the RNC, but friends who are so happy and so proud that I'm using my voice and this opportunity to speak about those who don't have a voice, who've been silenced because of imprisonment. So I'm very honored to be a part of this.
Share your story. Tell people who may not be as familiar with it as others. What happened to you in your life? Why did you go to prison in the first place? And what was that experience like, knowing what you had done?
Yes. Well, I guess I lived a pretty ordinary life before my first encounter with any criminal activities. I was a manager with FedEx. I worked for them for 10 years. I had been divorced. I married my childhood sweetheart. We had a 19-year marriage. I just gotten divorced. We had 5 children together. Now all of a sudden I'm living as a single woman. I got caught up in something I should not have become involved in, and that was gambling. And that really is what led to my job. All of a sudden I'm doing exciting things that I think are exciting at the casinos. And as a result of a gambling addiction, I lost my job. In the midst of this, I'm struggling. My husband disappears on me. I'm trying to take care of 5 children alone. My house is about to be foreclosed on, and bill collectors are calling, and every time the phone rings, I'm even changing my voice so that they don't know that it's me. And so just at a terrible time in my life, I made a bad decision to become involved, knowing nothing about drugs. I've never used drugs or anything. And the offer came for me to be what is called a telephone mule. I had all of the phone records. In the midst of this, my youngest son, was killed in a scooter accident. I have no job, I have no insurance, and I'm not making excuses. I'm just telling you my mental state was not good to make this life-changing decision like the one that I made, to become involved in a drug conspiracy. And when the house of cards fell down, I found myself on an indictment and being charged as the leader because I've got all the phone records. And so I decided to go to trial and fight. I was offered initially 3 to 5 years. Those 3 to 5 years, after a 6-week trial, well, even before the trial, I was out on bond for 2 years pre-trial. And I worked. By this time I'm working, and I'm sick over what I've done, not just regretting that we've been caught, but I'm sick over the bad decisions that I've made. But I go to trial and I fight it. And I lost. And I didn't even know that a life sentence was on the line. At sentencing, I was sentenced to life plus 25 years without the possibility of parole. My first time ever having an encounter with the law. And I'm sentenced to a life sentence. It was surreal to me. I remember hearing my parents sob in the courtroom. My children were broken. I left behind 4 children. My youngest was still a teenager, and he was the one who was driving the scooter when his brother was killed when they were hit by a truck. So he's dealing with trauma that has not been treated. And really, I'm dealing with trauma too that was not treated. So I found myself in prison. And it was a pretty dark place. It was a place where I've said many times that people don't really have hope. And that was a place that I really found my purpose in life. I started writing plays. I started doing a lot of things. I started mentoring women, and I started doing things that I could do to impact the culture that I was in for good. I started helping women get their GEDs. I did so many things. The warden, the captain, other staff members in the prison, they started recognizing things that I was doing. In fact, when my first bid for clemency, my warden captain, they wrote letters on my behalf, because not only had I helped change prison culture, I was doing things in the local community. I was getting the women who could do artwork and could do other crafts. And for the community, they started donating those things and holding big auctions for the community that was a little bit of a distressed community. And just really seeing what I could do. It became one thing that I say in prison, and that I would encourage the women, that if you can do good, do it. Because I think we all have the ability to do good. And as women started realizing that there were things that they could do through theater and through other things, programs and projects that I start up in prison, it started changing them. Many had never heard applause in their life. And just having someone who believed in them, that they had value, it changed everything. It was really a game changer in prison. And I don't say this lightly, that I was able to impact society from inside of prison, because the women who were being released with a totally different mindset. So when I received letters in prison from women who had been released, who I'd mentored, that was one of the best feelings. And also I received letters from family members. And while I was in prison, I even became an ordained minister. I became certified in pastoral counseling as I worked in the chapel, and the women started coming to me for me to counsel with them. They called for me many times when they had tragedies that happened in their families, and they had the opportunity to call someone to sit with them. So many women who I didn't even know would tell the chaplain, "Send for Miss Alice."
Alice, did you ever give up hope, or did you think you were going to be in prison for the rest of your life? And then how did President Trump hear about your story?
I can say that there were some hard times in prison, but really coming into prison, I'm gonna say I made a pact with my own self that no matter how hard it got, I was not going to give up my hope. I was not going to focus on where I was, and I'm a strong woman of faith. And I just didn't believe that God was going to allow me to die in prison. So I can say that it wasn't times that my hope wasn't failing, but just knowing that I had family out there, I couldn't afford to give up hope for them, for my children, for the rest of my family. And so I started doing some things that I still look at as incredible. I was allowed in my prison to speak at the only prisoner that I know of. I started speaking on platforms from prison. I spoke at Yale University from prison, New York University, the University of Washington, Google and YouTube platforms, and a video op-ed that I did went viral. And when Kim Kardashian saw it, she tweeted out, "This is so unfair." And when she did that, it went super viral. And she put together a team that we call Team Alice. She assembled 4 attorneys. She reached out to Ivanka, who she knew, to see if they could help with my case. And Ivanka showed it to Jared. And then Ivanka and Jared Kushner became part of Team Alice. They got all of my files and they peeled back, not what I'm saying happened, but they pulled back the layers of my case and saw
Did you
what
know this
really
as you
took
were
place.
in prison? Did you know
Yes.
about this behind the scenes in prison, but you didn't know where it would lead?
No, I knew. I had no idea. I call it, I put forth, I'd never stopped fighting for my freedom. I put all of my natural efforts into working hard to come to be set free. And I say this, God put his super behind my natural, and he did it. And Kim Kardashian was able to get an audience with the president as she advocated for my case. It wasn't an immediate thing. It took 7 months of her advocating before she got an audience. Kanye got involved. He wanted to see me free also. He knew about my case, and he and Kim were very invested in my case. And the president, when he saw it, and one thing that I have to say is that even though it was Kim Kardashian who brought my case to the attention of the president, I still had to be a candidate for clemency that was worthy of it. And so I spent the whole 21 years, I came out of prison with a completely clear record. No violence before prison, no violence in prison. So I for sure was not a safety risk. I was an asset to the prison, if you want to call that me an asset, but I was an asset there. And so
How did you find out you got clemency?
Kim told me on the phone. I didn't even know it. That morning, I was so nervous. The other women were telling me, Miss Alice, you're all over the news. I knew she had gone to the White House, but I really shut things off. And Ari, it was hamburger day. And we only had hamburgers once a week. So I went to lunch. I was not about to miss my hamburger that day. And I went to lunch, and they called me over the intercom, and my attorneys and Kim was on the phone. And when she told me, Miss Alice, we did it. I'm like, did what? Because I've closed everything out. I'm not watching the TV. I go in my room, I close the door, I'm looking out the window, I go to lunch by myself. And when she told me that I could go home, I can never forget. That moment was something I don't even remember, how I was screaming and jumping and praising God because that day had come, but it still didn't seem real until I saw my family waiting for me. And that's when probably everyone saw me running across that road to my family, because what we had been praying for had came that day. All of the disappointments, everything, the weight of having to be under that, of not knowing if I was going to ever come home to my family, was lifted off of me that day. And when I left there, the women were in, excuse me one moment, I'm sorry. Every time I even see that scene, I can't just impassively look at it, because all of the emotions of that day comes back. But when they called my name over the intercom, that I could go home, a shout, it was like within an hour, a little bit over an hour of me getting the news, a shout, a deafening shout, because they had locked all of the women down, went up over the entire prison. The women were in the windows, beating on the bars, stomping. It sounded like an earthquake, begging me, Miss, please don't forget about us. You could hear them. I mean, it was like just explosive. And I cannot, and I promised the women that day that I would never forget about them. I would never stop fighting for them. And I haven't.
Well, if I know anything about you, you're fighting for them now.
Yes,
you
I
are
am.
strong, and you've got your convictions. Nobody's going to shake those from you.
No.
Well, you're building a foundation now. Tell me about that. What's the purpose of your foundation?
The foundation is called Taking Action for Good. The reason that I decided to build out my own foundation is because there's a lot of theories about what works. I've also worked with other groups, but I wanted the ability to do things that I knew from practical experience of seeing women come back in and out of prison, things that don't work. They sound good, but I had the practical knowledge and I could make a difference there. And so I started my own foundation, Taking Action for Good, to help to be more, I believe, more effective. Not that I don't believe I'm effective or impactful with working with others, but I wanted to be able to do some things that I knew that only I could do. And as I've said, to whom much is given, much is required. And I've been greatly blessed with my freedom. And it's not only the criminal justice reform aspect in terms of trying to help other women and men that I've never seen, men who I've never seen. I'm also fighting for the men, not only to change criminal justice, the system for them, but to have a reentry model that would be second to none, that would be a holistic approach that includes family. Because many women who came back in did not have the support, didn't have community support, families didn't understand them. And I understood where they were coming from. I sat with many women who came back in who had no intention of coming back to prison, but there were some things out there that just failed them. And a big piece of that is we have to give family support also. So I wanted to be able to do some innovative things and do a different approach.
Since you were released, the world has changed.
Yes.
You had the killing of George Floyd. You had
Mhm.
the president make criminal justice reform a prominent issue in his State of the Union. Of course, he'll make it prominent Thursday night at the
Mhm.
convention. But a lot of people turn on the TV now and they see violence, they see riots, they see looting. What do you say to the skeptics of criminal justice reform who question whether or not it's a wise policy to release people who are nonviolent from prison?
Well, what is happening in criminal justice reform space is not a get out of jail free card. It's not throw open the prison doors. Most prisoners, I don't have the exact figure, so I don't want to quote anything, but I'm going to say at least 90% of the people, at least, are one day going to return home, going to re-enter society again. Do you want them to re-enter society better or worse than when they went into prison? So we have to examine ourselves too, as to looking at a system that has been so punitive and not as rehabilitative for the returning citizens, because that's who they are. They're going to be your neighbors. Their children are going to go to school with your children. Many of you are going to sit in church pews and not even know that this was a former prisoner. So we have to be smart on crime. The things that are taking place now is not representative of the people who I'm advocating for change. We don't want to even get caught up in the moment either as a society and just start grouping everyone the same. But the people who receive clemency have proven rehabilitation. They have been completely assessed as not being a safety risk to the community. And these are not people who just committed crimes. These are people who, as I say, have already paid their debt to society, but were unjustly, and I call it unjustly sentenced, not because there should not have been a sentence at all. Some really there shouldn't have been. They needed drug treatment. But because the time is way too much. And that's so you can't compare. It's like comparing, you're not comparing, it's not an equal scale that you're comparing people to who are dependent upon us to not get caught up. This is a very emotional time in this country. And we do not want to be led by emotion. And because we can't see people who are in prison, they're out of sight, out of mind. And so you're seeing the people you're seeing all of the things that are taking place and you're grouping them all together. I think that's a very, very bad mistake for anyone who even thinks that criminal justice is not important for this country. As I heard the panelists say earlier about who we are as a nation, the low percentage of the world population that America represents, yet we're incarcerating 25% of the world population. We're either the most evil society in the world, or there is something wrong in our justice system.
You talked about the panel that was earlier. Those are a group of Ohio lawmakers trying to make changes there. You were released from federal prison, but most people
Yes.
are in prison on state charges.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hear what's potential in Ohio, do you see this as something that is going to just spread throughout the country, or is it just individual states? Are you optimistic that Ohio, for example, can get it done?
Today was a great day for me to hear the Ohioans talk about what they want to see for their state. It makes me almost want to move to Ohio. Ohio can really, yeah, Ohio is really taking the lead with this. And, other states are doing things also, but Ohio has an opportunity to show the rest of the country what works. They're investing in people. And there are some other states who are doing the same too. But right now, Ohio, I'm going to say almost all eyes on Ohio right now, because the decisions that they make and the success, because I have no doubt that the changes that they're making are going to be successful. The things that they do, the other states can model after them. We are all about keeping citizens safe, and what they're doing is not only keeping their cities safe in Ohio, but also using a humane approach to the problems that they face, that they're facing as a state and we're facing as a nation. I love it that they're looking at the consequences of the collateral consequences, is what I'll say, of what happens to a person who has a felony record. They're looking at treating those who have addiction problems, treating the addiction, and the answer is not throwing them into the prison. Because my experience from speaking to people who come out of prison addicted, you wonder how that happened. It's because you're not treating the problem. You're sending them in, and untreated, they come back out, and they come back out with the same problem. So I know that the definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. And so we now know that the old policies have not been working. So we're ready to invest in people. I'm glad that Ohio is invested in people.
We don't have much time left, and I know that you've got a little bit of work to do this week. You got a big
Yes.
moment coming up Thursday as you stand before the nation.
Yes.
Tens of millions are going to be watching you. What's the next 2 days going to be like for you?
Well, I've lived this. I've been living this since I came home. And but these next 2 days, I think I've been in wonderment that I've been blessed to have this big opportunity to address the nation. And I hope as they see me, they will see me as a picture of what redemption looks like.
It's a beautiful story, and I think a lot of people in this country are moved by Alice to see what happened to you. Americans are fundamentally a just people.
Yes.
There's something in us that just has an innate sense of right and wrong. If somebody does something wrong, we believe in justice, and we believe that there should be a level of punishment, but it should be the right level. And I think it's been a blessing for our country to come to know you, to hear about an injustice getting righted, and to hear your stirring message about what you're going to do with it.
No,
So
thank
good luck
you.
Thursday.
Thank you. I love this country, and I love this country. I'm all in, because this to me is the greatest country in the world where we live right now. So I'm invested in helping people and helping this country move forward to a better America.
Thank you, Alice. Holly?
Thank you.
Ari, that was wonderful. And it has to feel good to be on this side of politics, working on issues that unify rather than divide. So that was really an incredible fireside chat. And Alice, what a story to be able to tell on America's grandest political stage. We'll all be tuning in, obviously, and cheering for you on Thursday night. And, you know, we also want to thank Senator John Eklund, Representative George Lang, Mark Holden, our co-sponsors at the Alliance for Safety and Justice and Americans for Prosperity, all the folks working so hard on the ground, you know, in battleground Ohio to ensure that that state remains really sort of the crown jewel of the criminal justice reform movement, because again, as goes Ohio, so goes the country. If you have any questions for any of our speakers today, feel free to reach out to the Justice Action Network directly, and we can facilitate those connections. If you want to learn more about our work, you can certainly go to our website at justiceactionnetwork.org. And you can also view our DNC edition of the Unconventional series on our website there. We are a bipartisan organization. And then for the latest developments in the bipartisan criminal justice reform space, you can follow us on Twitter at US Justice Action. And I can promise you, we will be live tweeting while Alice Marie Johnson is speaking live at the RNC on Thursday. Thanks again so much, everyone, for tuning in to our unconventional series, the RNC edition.